do my best to stay near the microphone. That's better, yeah? Okay, very good. So I'm going to talk to you about the world of virtual reality and the world of avatars. And one of the goals of my talk is that all of you leave this room knowing just what an avatar is and knowing how virtual reality works. And I want to take a step back from my research and talk a little bit about Stanford. So I was researching the psychology of avatars, meaning running experiments on what happens to the brain when you enter virtual worlds and when you spend time in digital avatars in the late 90s, 1998, 1999. Not a single university would even think about hiring me because who knew the word avatar in 1998? And Stanford, in its infinite wisdom, in their idea of taking risks with technology and big new ideas, hired me in 2003 to build a lab to study what happens to people when they spend time in virtual reality. This was long before VR was a big thing, but I think it epitomizes the forward thinking and the risk-taking mentality that Stanford does take. And as we go through my talk, hopefully you'll get excited about the big ideas and realize that these ideas really came to fruition because Stanford decided to take a chance on my work. If you do like the work I'm going to talk about today, I've written a book called Infinite Reality. And it's written for the very smart, brilliant person like yourselves who may not know what VR is, but who has a sneaking suspicion in the back of your minds that it may be important in your nation, in your commerce, in your children, etc. So if you do like this talk, please do give the book a read. What is virtual reality? So please, show of hands, how many of you have walked around wearing a virtual reality helmet before? All right, so a good fair number of you. So let me just talk you through what VR is and how it works. So here you have a gentleman, and he's walking around. There are sensors that capture his every move. So every time he walks, 1 meter forward. Every time he turns his head 10 degrees to the right. Every time he opens his mouth to say something, there's sensors all over the room that capture those physical movements. Inside of the computer, there is a virtual world. That virtual world could look just like this room. And every time I step 1 meter forward, the sensors measure that I moved a meter and redraw the world to reflect that movement. So in this case, a meter backward. So as this guy is walking around this room, every time he moves 100 times per second, we're redrawing the world to reflect that movement. Does anybody know what he's doing?
Balancing on the...
Very good. He is what we call walking the virtual plank. So he put the helmet on, and the physical room looked just like the room he was in physically, but it was a virtual version. And we decided to put a pit that was 10 meters deep in the middle of the room. So to give you a sense of how real virtual reality is, when you put this helmet on, the room looks the same. I hit a button, and I drop a chasm in that room. 1 and 2 adults refuse to step toward that pit. Meaning 1 and 2 adults, even though their frontal lobe, the rational side of their brain tells them there's no pit in this room, refuse to step within a meter of that hole. Okay? And it's a very, very powerful simulation. We call this presence, feeling like you are absorbed in a virtual world. And when adults come into my lab, they will not step over that pit. So it's a very powerful psychological experience. To give you a sense, Stanford decided to rebuild my lab last year. I will be not humble for a moment and say that we have the best virtual reality lab in the world. It will remain so for at least a few months before it becomes completely obsolete by technology moving quickly. But we have a lab that perhaps there's an opportunity for you guys to come and see it tomorrow if there's time, where it has virtual sight, virtual sound that's spatialized and moves around the room, and even virtual touch where the floor shakes. It combines the 3 senses and produces a psychological phenomenon that really makes you feel like you're there. To give you a sense of how fast the technology is moving, there are 2 video game platforms that are making it so everything that I study, which I'll get to in a moment, you don't need a lab for anymore. So on the top left is something called the Microsoft Kinect, which is a video game platform that just became the fastest selling consumer electronic product ever in the history of the United States. Not the fastest selling game, the fastest selling consumer electronic product. And what the Kinect does, it's a brilliant piece of technology that from a single infrared camera tracks all of your body movements. So in my lab, when you come, you have to wear sensors on your body, and there's cameras all over the room, and that's how we know that you've stepped forward to update the pit. We have all these fancy equipment, costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. The Kinect costs $100 and does the same thing. On the bottom right, there's something called auto stereo. And auto stereo, half of VR is showing you immersively, perceptually real information. Auto stereo says, you know what, if you want to see 3D, you don't need glasses anymore. You have what's called a lenticular display, which is, you may have seen these postcards that when you look at them, they give you a sense of depth. They do that by reflecting light in various directions. We now have something called a Nintendo 3DS, which is a video game on every school bus in the United States, which projects a hologram to the child playing the game without any glasses. So what we have in my lab to make the pit work is you walk around, we sense that movement, and we show you a virtual scene to the head-mounted display. And it turns out these two game technologies solve the virtual reality problem. So the inventor of the term virtual reality, Jeremy, has said since the late 70s that nobody's going to care about virtual reality if A, you need a dedicated room to make it work, or B, the person using it has to wear uncomfortable stuff on her head. Okay? Just that's not going to happen. And so finally the technology is here to make VR appear in the living room. But I'm a social scientist, I study avatars. Avatars are virtual versions of people. So here you have my collaborator, Jack Loomis. Anytime I'm an experimental subject, that's what I do. I run experiments on people. I'm going to talk to you about a bunch of findings. Every time we run an experiment, many people, we call them subjects, come to the lab, and then I see what happens when I put them in VR and see what happens to their brain. When subjects walk in, we take 2 photographs of them, and then 10 minutes later, after using it just like him, and you can view it from any angle. You can view it from any angle. We can animate it. It's just like any other digital object. It's captures all of the variants in your head. These are so real that we work with the federal government in the United States to use them for police identification. So in 15 minutes, you come to my lab. After a few photographs, I built an avatar that looks just like you. But it's not enough just to look like you. It's also got to behave like you. And from a single webcam, without putting anything on the person's face, I can capture emotions and your facial expression. So here you see a subject looking in front of a webcam. As he moves his head, you can see the real-time video of him. On the right is the avatar that I'm animating his facial expressions that I'm capturing just from one cheap camera. So computer vision sees what his physical face is doing, and in real time draws his avatar face to be doing the same thing. So when you come to my lab, I've built your head, and now I can make your head do what your physical face does. So I've captured the essence of your emotions, of your gestures, and of what your face looks like in a period of 15 minutes. There's a product coming out from Microsoft called Kinect, which is, again, takes my lab out of the abstract and puts it into the consumer market. But I want to digress for a second. When I built your head, as a species, humans have forever been able to look in the water and see our reflection. In the last 100 years, we've been able to see ourselves doing something we've done before, maybe 10 years ago, via a home movie. For the first time ever in the history of humanity, I teach the media class in Stanford, and I'm fairly sure that we are witnessing a landmark event in media. With an avatar, I can show you yourself doing something you've never physically done. Right? We've always been able to see ourselves in the mirror, and on videotape see ourselves doing something in the past. But I can take your virtual head, put it on an avatar body, and in the history of video games, of the thousands of animations that are built, I can show you yourself doing something you've never physically done. And that's a really powerful idea. I'm going to return to that later. All right? His avatar moves with him in real time, and he's a white male. That's what he is in the physical world, so everything is working fine. He ducks down. When he comes up, we've changed him to a woman of color. Okay? And the big question that we ask is, when you spend so much time in a virtual world in an avatar that's different from you, do you behave like your physical self, or does your avatar change the way you behave and how you think about yourself such that your behavior is consistent with your virtual self? And we've run a number of studies. His avatar, which we modeled to look just like his face and have his emotions, is losing half of a kilogram every 3 times his knees pass his waist. Okay? So after 10 minutes of running in place, he becomes very thin and fit. We then force him to stand still, and all the weight comes back. Okay? So what he's seeing in a very visceral, perceptually real manner, he's seeing the cause and effect of exercise, and he's boosting something we call self-efficacy. So psychologists, in order to achieve a goal, you've got to... He passed away about 7 or 8 years ago. And his grandson, from all the advertising footage, granted an advertising agency the rights to rebuild that 3D avatar of him. And Orville Redenbacher, the spokesperson for a famous popcorn company in the United States, continues to be the spokesperson. He was also the president of the company. Continues to be the spokesperson from Beyond the Brink. So when you watch this, forget the technology because it's 10 years old and we can do it much better than they did back then. But conceptually, this is not abstract. This is a thing that people are doing.
I'm Orville Redenbacher. These MP3 players get lighter every day. Would you believe this little baby holds 30 gigs? But if you want light and fluffy, you've got to try my famous gourmet popping corn. Mine pops up lighter and fluffier than ordinary popcorn. See the old lid?
All right, we'll leave it at that. But this is a great, amazing idea in the sense that I select people who use non-recycled paper, bring them to the lab, and force them to cut down a virtual tree, meaning they put the helmet on, see a beautiful forest. They've got a device that shakes to mimic a chainsaw in their hand, and they actually are cutting down trees because they told us they use non-recycled paper. When we track their paper use later on, we are actually changing their energy conservation habits compared to many, many control conditions you can ask us about. Again, the theme arises that VR changes those very entrenched, hard to solve problems. So I'm going to close there and places your actual senses with digital senses, and it's real enough such that when you come into my lab and you put the helmet on and we put a virtual pit in the room, most adults are afraid to walk over that virtual pit, even though they know in their mind that there's no real pit there. The sensory information overloads their rational mind and they feel that it's real.
How can people present themselves without the physical bodies?
People present themselves without physical bodies in the United States more often than they do with physical bodies. So children spend 8 hours a day using digital media, for example, Facebook, video games, and for especially the younger generation, digital interaction is often more prevalent than face-to-face interaction.
And how people collaborate in those places in virtual reality?
It depends on the context. So IBM, a very big corporation in the United States, has a fully introverse, meaning a virtual world where they talk to each other using avatars. In a place like Facebook, people collaborate simply by sharing their information in these lower tech virtual spaces.
How is virtual reality changing our reality and us?
It's true that when you spend time in an avatar, a virtual representation of yourself, you become more like that avatar. So if you spend a lot of time in, for example, in men, when they wear female avatars, they become more nurturing and they show more empathy, meaning they take on the features of a woman. If you spend time in an avatar of a different race, you'll gain empathy toward that race. So when white people spend time in avatars that are non-white, it's a way to use them to train empathy. So it's a neat way to think about when you spend so much time in a digital body, it actually changes your physical self.
And what are the latest developments in virtual reality? What is the focus of the future of virtual reality?
So for that, I think you should read Infinite Reality, my book, which really is dedicated toward describing what the future is going to hold from virtual reality.
Can you say at least a little bit about like one segment at least, what is like the future now in the development?
So one big area of the future with virtual reality and a good application is with business. So fuel is expensive, travel is dangerous and tiring. Imagine if you could have a good business meeting without having to fly from Slovenia or Norway to here. What if you could just instantly teleport to a place, and that's what virtual reality will offer us as avatars get better developed.
Thank you so